Christy, welcome to the Happiness Happens podcast. I'm so excited to have you on my show today. You are all things beautiful and light, and I'm just so excited to tap into your energy and your expertise and to hear and learn from you today.
Thank you so much for having me here. I'm excited to be here.
Me too. Oh, we're going to have such a good conversation. These conversations are my favorite because I've only kind of been in this like energy space or even understanding what intuition is only for a few years. And just having that understanding and having that awareness has shifted my life so significantly because it's brought so many opportunities of things that I never even anticipated would ever happen or be a reality in my life. And so my first question for you, I almost asked you a separate question, but my first question for you is, what does happiness mean to you?
Happiness for me is very much connected to alignment with our soul.
Mm.
Our soul is here to help guide our journey. And that is our soul is that is connected to us through our intuition. And I think that happiness is when we are honoring our intuition, honoring our soul, and letting that guide our journey so that we're making the most of the time that we have here.
That is beautiful. That is beautiful. And so if someone's listening to this right now, our listeners listening to this, and they're like, okay, that's cool, but how do I do that? How do I start to begin to, you know, find the power of my intuition and also find that alignment with my soul? I know those are two separate questions. So whichever one or whichever way you want to take it first.
It's interesting because you're right. That's a question that a lot of people have. And it's funny because I think that we're so innately built to connect with our intuition. This is something
Mm.
that each and every one of us has been given. It is the GPS for our soul, essentially. And so we all have been given that. And I think that over time, as we live here on earth and as we let ourselves follow certain rules that we believe exist here on earth, we start to think, oh, that's not something that I should honor, or we're told so often to not honor our intuition. So we have that tendency to move away from that. And so
Mm.
what I find is that as people start to decide that they want to reconnect with that they want to open up to that again, that starts to come in actually pretty naturally, simply through that intention. I would like to connect on a deeper level with my intuition, whether you say that just out loud to the universe, to God, to the angels, whatever it is that you call on, but just starting with that intention. And I think the other piece of that is just taking that time to go within. We have this tendency to go outside of ourselves so often to seek the answers. And truly, we have all been given the resources within ourselves
Mm.
to make these connections and to connect with the answers that we need. And so, the more that we can take that time to get quiet with ourselves, to be able to listen to ourselves in whatever way that we need to do that, whether
Mm.
that's meditation or going for walks, or that people connect in so many different ways with that. But taking that time to listen to our souls, that's where we make those connections.
Okay, I'm really glad that you said that because I actually just posted a TikTok and then I put it on Instagram, a reel about how we're always looking for happiness outside of ourselves, right? And we're
Mhm.
always looking for something to validate how we feel internally. And I think the biggest challenge with that is because so many people live their life according to the stories that they have been told about who they are, how they are, and why they are. And I think it can be a really challenging place to get from understanding why and how someone views you and in turn how you should be showing up in your life according to that, right? And also on the flip side of it, maybe none of that even feels true for you. Maybe those stories are not actually your stories. And so, you know, I know you just mentioned a little bit of like the ways that you can kind of like tap back in, but is there anything that you would recommend if someone is hanging on to a story that they know is not for them, yet they can't seem to let that go?
Absolutely. I think that starts with, again, tuning in and just really connecting with ourselves and
Mm.
listening to ourselves. Because what I find is that as we do that, that starts to become that natural progression, right?
Mm.
We start to recognize the ways that the stories outside of ourselves, or maybe even the stories that we've told ourselves for a long time, no longer align. We start to
Mhm.
recognize as we step into our power, as we step into that energy, that these parts of ourselves that maybe we haven't connected with ever or in a very long time exist. And it's so empowering.
Mhm. Mhm. I completely agree with you, and this is like music to my ears because I think a lot of the times I know for myself when I before I understood the power that being in this space had and understanding stories that may not be true for us, like until I really realized how much comes from that and how much your life can change from that, I didn't really get it. You know what I mean? And it was like frustrating because it's like I know I'm meant for so much more, and I know I'm not very happy. I'm just not content in my life. And so how do I even begin to make that shift? But you're right, it's taking those small little steps and like really breaking it down. And I think I don't know if you agree with this, but sometimes people think it has to be this big massive thing that just like drops into your life. It doesn't though.
Absolutely. And I think that so much of that comes also just from you were talking about, I know I'm not happy, right?
Mm.
I think a lot of times that acknowledgement of not being happy is the very catalyst that brings us to the next level where we are starting to connect with ourselves more and we are starting to open to our intuition, to better versions of ourselves. So as we allow ourselves to acknowledge, okay, I'm not feeling happy, it starts to set into motion this progression of questions and exploration and where do I need to make changes and what would be helpful for me to do in order for my life to feel happier or more aligned.
That's so key. And when you look at intuition versus energy, is there a difference for you? Like, are they the same?
I think that so for me, intuition is more about our connection to
Mm.
energy, right? It's a way to read and process energy. So for me, they're a little bit different.
Okay, can we talk about the sort of like the differences between them? Like, how would you tap into energy, and then how would you tap intuition? Like, what does that make sense? Is that a clear question?
So I think that intuition is really the vehicle in which we interpret energy. And we're doing that
Mm.
all the time, and people don't realize that. My background is in mental health counseling. So I did that for a long time. And when I started to do the work that I'm doing now, I shifted into more of a life coaching approach because I was recognizing that a big part of what was happening for people was that they would have these mental health diagnoses and all of these things that were happening for them, or they were struggling with things like anxiety, depression, things like
Mm.
that. And one of the things that I noticed about that is what was really actually happening for them is that they were processing a lot of energy. And that was very true for me.
Oh.
I thought I had an anxiety disorder for years, but what was happening for me was my body was processing all of this energy all of the time. So we're processing energy through our intuition all the time. We're feeling energy all the time, whether that's the collective energy, the energy that is all around us, the planetary energy, the energy that's influencing each and every one of us, or whether that's the energy of the space that we're in, whether that's the energy of other people's energy around us, right? If we
Mm.
are standing in the grocery store behind someone and they're feeling highly anxious, there can be an energy exchange when our auras, our energy fields interact with one another. And then we go home and we feel anxious and we don't necessarily know why we feel anxious, but we start to take that anxiety and we turn that into or we apply that to a circumstance in our life, right? So we start to
Mm.
worry about something in our own life. But really what happened is there was just an energy exchange.
That is really powerful because okay, have to relate this back to just something that I experience all the time. So, I can be
Mhm.
totally fine. Everything is totally fine. I'm having a great day, whatever. I'll go out into public, like into the public, go to the store, whatever it is. I am exhausted, like exhausted. I can't like I honestly it's like 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I feel like I'm gonna fall asleep because I'm so exhausted from being around all the people. And I'm like, oh my goodness, am I turning into like a stay at home forever introvert? Do you know what I mean? Like nothing wrong with being introverted, like at all. That's not what I'm saying. It's more like I'm just like not inspired to leave my house because I'm like, it's so overwhelming because there's so much going on and I feel so exhausted when I come home. So it's interesting because my when I had sort of like talked to my doctor about this years ago, she was like, you have high functioning anxiety. So being out in places, whatever, whatever. And I'm like, really though? Because it just kind of feels like I don't. You know, I'm like, do I though? Like, I don't know. So it's really interesting because I've kind of had this idea or inclination that it probably was just other people's energy. And, I'm someone who feels very deeply. And so naturally, I would probably feel everybody else's energy when I'm not even intending to. So, with that said, do you have like one or two ways that someone can start to protect their energy, even if they don't have a lot of time? Like, what if you're like, oh, you're sitting in the car, you're like, okay, I just got to go like in the store or whatever. Because I know there's a bunch of rituals, there's like so many things you can do. But I guess one or two quick tips for people to be able to protect their energy.
Sure, because I think that that's the most important thing. Because we should understand, I really love the label of energy sensitivity rather than
Ooh,
high functioning anxiety, right? Because that's, in my opinion, that's what that really is.
I agree.
And so I find that as people learn these tools and these strategies for balancing and managing their energy fields, suddenly they don't feel such a need to be as introverted. Some people
Mm,
who are more highly energy sensitive are going to tend to be a little bit more introverted or need a
right.
little bit more time and space in their own energy. And that can be a tool and a strategy in and of itself, right? Is to listen to, when do I need to take time and space for myself? When
Mm-hmm.
do I need to just rejuvenate myself by taking time and space in my own energy? So that to
Mm-hmm.
me is a really important strategy. And I think that that gets underestimated, or sometimes people feel badly because they're feeling this need to stay home, and that's really
Mm-hmm.
your energy field asking for you to do that, to take some time to replenish and to connect with yourself and rebalance and those kinds of things. However, we also have to have that balance of going out into the world and having those experiences. So
Mm-hmm.
one of the simplest tools that I recommend to people is simply creating this bubble of light around ourselves. So
Mm,
I like to do that by starting here in the heart center with a spark of light. So energy is created through imagination or through envisioning in our minds. And so I will imagine this spark of light right here in my heart, and I will take that light and fill the entire inside of my body with that light. And then I let that light expand outside of my body, creating this bubble all the way above my head, all the way below my feet. And then I set the intention that I can still feel and absorb that positive energy, because those of us who are energy sensitive, this is our superpower, right? And this ability to still deeply understand and connect with people, but also setting the intention that it is filtering out that negative, heavy energy that people who are energy sensitive are absorbing like sponges all the time and walking around carrying this heaviness
yeah.
that they don't know what to make of.
That makes so much sense, and that's really key. And as you were talking, I was thinking to myself, like, I'm not someone who's ever really been I'm not overly an introverted person. I've always been extroverted. And throughout the last couple years, especially as you have to like stay home and stuff like that, it kind of shifted a little bit of like, the way that I showed up in the world. And I kind of netted out on like, okay, I must just be a little bit more introverted now. And like, that's totally cool. Still pretty extroverted, but like, man, this energy really drains me. Like, being around these people is exhausting. Like, all this stuff, like certain people, not everybody, of course. And so it's really interesting to think that it's probably just not protecting my energy at all when I'm out in public, but I think it's really challenging to notice that when you're someone who is so used to being around other people and never been phased before, to all of a sudden being like so deeply impacted by it. So maybe this is just like an awareness piece for people who are maybe similar to the way that I am.
The
Pardon?
planet is ascending. So as the planet ascends,
Mm,
we're watching people open in ways that they were not open before. We're watching people's energy fields open, right? So for people like you who didn't have that experience before, all of a sudden our bodies are slowly but surely absorbing more light and opening up to more energy. And we all as a collective are connecting on a deeper level with our intuition, which again
mm,
is that vehicle to interpret and understand energy. So if that's happening, then it's also going to make us more energy sensitive.
that is so true. That is so true.
Yeah. So
I
so
really like
that's
this
where
concept.
these for implementing and protecting our energy is really important.
That is really key. And I think it's more about just like setting
Mhm.
the intention in your life overall, that you make that commitment to yourself to, protect your energy and be intentional about that, and, you know, make that a priority. I'm going to try that today. I'm going to see if it makes any difference. Especially like when you're like flying and traveling and like all this stuff, like you're in new places, you're in new time zones, you're with new people, and like, you know what I mean? And so it's a total disruptor to your like everyday, which is amazing in its own right, right? So I want to ask you about signs and about angel numbers. Those are like two of my favorite things ever. And it's funny because I started talking about it a little bit on social media, not so much like this is what it means or anything like that. But if I see something, I'm like, oh, like 1111 across my dash, or like 555 here and whatever. I always take that as a sign that the universe is there and supporting me, and is, has my back. And also, I guess okay, this is a two-part question, but I'm going to ask you this part first. One of the things that I like to do is ask the universe for confirmation on X, Y, and Z, like whatever the specific situation is. So I'll say, show me 555 and a basketball before I get to here if X, Y, and Z is aligned. Okay, like I try and make it really specific. Do you think that if I do see those things in the time frame that I've asked for, do you think that's actually a confirmation from spirit, or do you think that's my mind trying to find the confirmation from spirit?
Oh my gosh, I love to talk about the magic in this world. So I love this question. The world is so magical and we miss it all the time, right? So 100% confirmation from spirit, from the
Mm.
universe, from God, from your higher power, from the angels, whatever you want to call that. I feel like we actually have so much spiritual help, and that there are so many different energies that are here helping us, of the light, that are just here to help guide us and to support us on our journey on earth.
Mm.
And so one of the ways that those energies communicate with us is through signs, whether that's through repeating numbers, which is what we call angel numbers, or so many other different ways. And it's so incredible the ways that those messages get through to us. And I think that we miss so many of them so often, because this is really the language of the universe. This is the way that that
Mm.
interaction happens. We can intuitively connect internally, but externally we can also connect with these signs. And it's another way that we can receive messages and receive guidance here in this world.
I love that. I'm actually obsessed so much. So I
Mhm.
want to know, okay, do you want to break it down by like what each angel number means? Like, do you think we have time for that? Or,
Yes. You know what I think is most important though with signs. And we can go through some of them and
yeah.
talk about what some of those mean, but I always say with signs and synchronicities, the most important thing is that we start with, when we're trying to interpret something. So we start with, does that feel like a sign, right? And usually if
Mm.
it feels like a sign, it is. And then when something feels like a sign, I think the most important thing that we should do is to actually take a step back and ask ourselves, what does this mean to me? Because
Ooh.
your guides, your angels are going to be delivering the signs and synchronicities from your frame of reference, right? Like I think you talked about basketballs or something
Yeah.
in your sign, or something like that, right? So, let's say that you have these basketballs showing up for you and you didn't necessarily ask for those. What does that basketball mean to you? What is that
Right.
a symbol for, right? Because symbols are that language of the universe. And so a lot of times there are collective meanings to symbols, but the most important message is always going to come from, what does this mean to me?
Mm. Okay, that is really, really important. And I think that where kind of struggle sometimes with when I see different angel numbers is I don't really know what I'm supposed to do next. And so I just kind of take that. I see 555 a lot. That's like a big number for me. And then I'll see like ones, but I kind of see 555s and 777s are typically like the ones that come through for me. And so I tend to just Google like what is the meaning of 555, and then I try and think about what was I thinking about in that moment when that sign came through. Would that be a good way to start to like understand what is what that sign means? Because I feel like you could make it mean anything you want it to, which I guess is good, but then also it's kind of like, is that false hope in something, you know?
Yeah, because if you can look that up and there's all kinds of different meanings, so you can say, oh, what, this is the one, this is what the message was for me. So I think that a really nice progression with things like that, first of all, I recommend to everyone that they create what I call a magic book, because again, I love the magic in this world.
Ooh.
So some kind of a notebook, it doesn't have to be fancy, although I like it to look fancy. I like it to look really magical. And you just take notes as to things that come through that feel like signs, as to things that feel like intuitive prompts. You just start to notice more, and through that process you're acknowledging that, and as you acknowledge that, then your guides and your angels are like, yes, they're paying attention finally, and they start to give you more of that. So life gets so much more magical when you do that. So I like to start there. And so that would be absolutely first something that you would write down and that you would acknowledge. And then I think the next step after that is to ask yourself, okay, so what does the number 5 mean to me? Or what does 555 mean to me? And do I have a specific connection with that? So you start there, and then maybe you would just kind of jot down some ideas as to words that come through to you. And it doesn't have to make logical sense to you, right?
Okay.
But whatever, like what's immediately coming through for you. And then you can go Google it
Okay, I
and
love
kind
that.
of build a there.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. The challenge that I have with that is I see all of my signs when I'm driving. So, like
Mhm.
so I'm like, "Oh my god." I'm like, Okay, I gotta check it right now." So I'll literally be driving and I'm, like, typing into Google. I'm like, "555 meaning, 555 meaning," and I'm like, "What does this mean?" And then I'm like, "Okay, what was I thinking about?" and whatever, but I constantly feel like I'm getting the same signs over and over, probably because I'm not paying attention in that way. So, like, is there a way to sort of take that, wait until you get home, like, however many hours later and be like, "Okay, like, do you meditate on that? Like, what was that sign? What did that mean?" That kinda thing? Or is it something
Yeah.
that has to be done in the
And
present moment?
nope, it's something you can take and you can process that a little bit later.
Mm.
A lot of times I find intuition is a little bit of a slower moving energy anyway. So you might get an immediate sense of in the car, if you ask yourself, okay, so what does that mean to me? You might get an immediate sense of that, or it might take a little time throughout the day to kind of let that float to the surface. I would say intuition kind of floats to the surface like the thing in the magic 8 ball that kind of slowly floats up with the message.
Yes.
That's kind of how I always see intuitive thoughts coming through. And so it might take a little bit of time anyway. And you will find with signs, a lot of times signs have a tendency to repeat themselves, especially if
Mm.
it's something that's easy for our guides and angels to do, like have the numbers show up, right? So you'll see those repeating numbers. What I also like to do, especially in situations like that, where you're driving the car, you're not able to just sit and meditate on it right then and there, is to ask myself, what was I just thinking about? Or
Mm.
what was just happening for me, because a lot of times those signs will come through at the time that's in alignment with what's happening, right? So I have actually a license plate combination of letters that comes through for me whenever I start to worry and when I'm driving, and my guides and my angels will put a car in front of me that has that symbol that's basically like, number one, stop worrying and trust us,
That's
but we're helping and we're supporting you. And the angel numbers, the repeating numbers, are always a message of we're here to help and we're here to support you. Specifically for me, the 555s are very much about a significant period of transformation in your life. So
mm.
I would guess, because you have so many of these fives that are happening, there's a lot of change, there's a lot of moving parts, there's a lot of transformation that's happening, which is really cool, because what comes after the fives is the sixes. And the repeating sixes are victory, celebration, moving out of a time where things have felt maybe a bit chaotic or unpredictable or things like that. And you're moving into calmer waters or a smoother time or a time of celebration. So,
That is
and the
cool.
sixes always come after the five. Yeah.
And that's a really key point because I was going to ask you, is there such a thing as negative signs? Because typically you look at 666 and that's something that is satanic. It's something that has really negative meanings and all that kind of stuff. But I'm guessing in the angel realm, it does not have the same meaning because I see 666 and I panic. I'm like, oh God. I'm like, what is happening?
Right. And I don't believe in negative signs. I do believe
Mm.
that we're guided in terms of where we need to maybe make some changes and things like that. Right. I
Right.
do believe that we get guidance on that. But in terms of the 666, that actually is an angel number too. And like I was saying, it's actually a really beautiful message of victory, of celebration, of wow, you made it through some challenging stuff.
Mm,
And it's that acknowledgement of that. So it's actually an incredibly beautiful message when we get that number.
I love that. Could we touch quickly on
Yeah.
like 111 and then 1111? Like, is there a difference between
Yeah.
the three and the four ones?
So I tend to see that as, like the more repeating numbers for me, it is just like a bigger energy around
Like the
those numbers.
stronger the message, like the stronger the
Yeah.
confirmation.
Yes, exactly.
Oh,
So with 111 and with 1111, specifically 11s are a gateway energy. So this is an energy that is telling us that we're entering into a new phase. So I find a lot of people before they start to come see me will start to see the 1111s because they're stepping into their spiritual awakening, right? Or a new level of their spiritual awakening, or they're stepping into a new phase in their lives. Like you were talking about, you started to open to this stuff a few
mhm.
years ago. And I would guess if you were noticing that you were getting a whole lot of
Oh
1111s
yeah.
around that time period, because like that's that opening. It's like, okay, you're stepping into a new phase of your journey. It's the beginning of a journey, and it's a beautiful awakening, and it's a deeper connection with your intuition, with source, with the divine.
That's amazing. And then, so I'm
Yeah.
guessing they're kind of like sequential. Like you see 111 and then kind of, is it like when you've like graduated from 111, you go to like 222? It doesn't work like that, right?
It works like that. Yeah. In fact, a lot of times it works like that. We'll start to see that progression. And it's interesting to sort of watch the different energies of that because it really is the journey through life, right? So like I was talking about with the fives, that's such a period of transformation and there's so much that's changing and transforming during that time period. And then we see with the sixes that okay, like we step into the next level where we're feeling like we have been successful with some things and we can rest a little bit and celebrate a little bit and enjoy a little bit, and then we move into the sevens where we're starting to again level up with some things, but now we're working through different levels of things and we're having to learn how to stand strong in our truth and stand strong in our voice and things like that. And then we move into the eights, which is abundance coming in. It's the reward for
Mm.
all of the hard work, and it's just like this progression that we see in life.
And then I'm assuming that that progression continues your
Mhm.
entire life. So like throughout your journey, you've kind of like you go through like phase 1 and you go through all of the like go through all of the numbers quote unquote and then phase 2, phase 3 and then it's just essentially it's like equating to like your higher self, higher evolution, best version of you that you are supposed to turn into while you're here on this earth.
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely. Yep.
Very
And
interesting.
when we're getting into the nines, right, we're looking at, okay, we're closing some things out and there are some endings and there's some shifting, and then we go back into the ones.
This is so cool and super
Yeah.
interesting. I didn't realize that the
Mhm.
numbers worked like that. I thought that they were just like, I didn't realize there was an actual sequence behind them. That is really, really cool. And so I guess from that place, I know you talk a lot about this in all of your social media content, all of your videos, everything that you create and put out online. And I would love for you to tell our listener right now how they can connect further with you and how they can learn more about all of the things that you talk about. Where would you like them to go?
They can follow me on my TikTok, my Instagram at Christy Clarity, and my YouTube is at Christy Clarity as well. So I have all kinds of stuff up in there. I do a weekly energy reading on my YouTube where I break down what's going on with the collective energy. So that's the energy that impacts each and every one of us, especially for the energy sensitives.
Mm.
And how do we make the most of the energy for that week? So that to me is one of the most important offerings that I create. And I talk a lot about angels, like you're saying, and a lot about energy.
I love that. We're gonna have to have you back on the podcast to talk about like the whole other side of like the collective energy. We didn't get into it today, but I know that we could. I think you and I could talk for hours about all these things and share tons of crazy stories about all of the signs and synchronicities. Like I'll share one with you really quick before we sort of wrap up. But I just was traveling this week and I fly on standby sometimes. Like I don't buy a ticket, like I'll fly on standby. And so it's kind of risky. Like you never know if you're actually going to make the flight or whatever. So I just kind of set the intention at the beginning of the day. I was like, I'm going to go to the airport. Security's going to be a breeze. I'm really excited about it. I'm going to walk to the gate. I'm going to stand by for the earlier flight and I'm going to get on that flight and I'll get a window seat, this or something better. Like I always add this or something better to the end. And so I literally did just that. My mother in law dropped me off at the airport. I walked right through security like it was a breeze. It was probably 5 minutes from walking into the airport and getting to the gate and standing by early for the flight. They had closed the flight. They were closing the flight in like 3 minutes. So you can't get on the flight anymore because the flight's closed, right? So I got to the gate and I was like, hey, I'm on the next flight, like the 7 p.m. flight. Do you have any, or 8 p.m. flight? Do you have any availability or whatever on this flight? She's like, okay, let me check for you really quick. So she starts checking. And she's like, oh, she's like, yeah. She's like, we have lots of space on this flight. She's like, let me move you to this flight. She's like, do you want a window or an aisle? And I was like, I want a window. And she was like, okay, great. And then she's like, okay, I'm going to put you at a row all by yourself. And she's like, and I'll even give you extra leg room. And I was like, oh my God, thank you so much. Like, that is so nice. I literally walked right onto the flight. I had like the best flight of my life. I was amazing. Like my legs were stretched out. Like I was like, this is wonderful. And so I don't know. I'm just kind of looking at that as like a nice reminder of when you actually just let it flow, like put the intention out there and like let the answer come to you. It just does. Thoughts?
100%. Intention is everything. And
Mm,
that's another part of the magic in this world. So when we choose to set an intention for things, we help to guide the energy. That is like asking what it is that we want. And that is allowing us to step into that powerful role that we have as a co-creator here in this world. And it gets really, really magical when we start to do that because we see what we can create.
beautiful. I agree with you completely. And I want to ask you this final question. It's one that I ask all of my guests when they come on the show. I've been asking it for years and I actually never really get the same answer, which is really cool. But what's one way our listener can find a little more happiness in their day every day starting today?
I think that it's meditation. I think that that
Mm,
is huge and one of the most important things that we can do. And we can meditate in so many different ways. So you can do traditional meditation or guided meditation or going for walks, going for hikes, doing something artistic, whatever it is that you can get lost in, that you can lose yourself in and lose time in, that's going to allow you to connect with your soul. And when you're connected with your soul, you're going to be more connected to your happiness.
beautiful. Thank you so much for joining me, Christy. This was so lovely having you on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks. And thank you so much for tuning into this episode on the Happiness Happens podcast. Remember that happiness happens when you're least expecting it.